We are studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, and he is now elaborating on the story, the parable, which is narrated in chapter 3 of the Kena, when the gods, not only in the cosmos but within us, in their psychological workings in us, have attained to victory. But the text of the Kena says, the eternal conquered for the gods, and in the victory of the eternal, the gods grew to greatness. And immediately that suggests to us the deeper reality that we must gradually become conscious of. Every time that we say, I have achieved, I have learnt, I overcame, we have the sense that we, that is this point of awareness that we call I, has the power, has the knowledge, has the capacity, has the energy, and this is what did it. I did. But when you look deeper, you realize the energy you have is not really yours. It is the energy that you have taken in from outside. On a very physical level, you might say, the food that you ate gave you the physical energy. So rather than saying, I have the energy, or with my energy I did, one should rightly say, the energy that I received from the food, from the plants, from the air that I breathe, that with that energy, this was done. Or even by that energy, this was done, and I have only directed the energy. It's like a gardener who's watering his plants. It would be an error to say, I have poured my water to make the plants fresh. The water came, I only directed it. But looking deeper, what within me had the intelligence and even the awareness to direct the water? And you recognize there is an intelligence inside you which is directing the energy, and the intelligence itself is not yours. You acquired it, if at best. Within you it was developed. Did you develop it? You may say, yes, through my studies. But did you actually work to increase your intelligence? You may have studied, you may have played, you may have listened to things, and as a result the intelligence grew. But how it grew, you do not even know. So it is as if your intelligence itself, like your energy, is a part of a larger cosmic intelligence. And through your growing up processes, that intelligence has grown in you, which you enjoy, but you never consciously grew or developed the intelligence. And so the right thing would be to say, the intelligence which has grown in me guided the energy that I have acquired from elsewhere or which was poured through me and made this happen. And when you think about it in this way, deeper and deeper, you realize actually you are never the doer. You are only a point of support on which or through which something much larger than you is pouring energy, intelligence, and all the other faculties by which things are happening. As if through you, as if resting on you, as if based supporting in you, but actually you were never the doer. All you have done is you have seized what was being done through you and claimed it for yourself. The water that is passing through the pipe, you have now declared ownership. This is mine, this is me, and I am watering the plants. This is mine, this is me, so my energy is now being put to make this possible, my intelligence, and so on. Other than being an error, it has no other place. So this is the great truth, not only for us, but even of the energies working in us and the intelligence working in us, that is the powers of the gods, the cosmic powers. They make the same error of saying or thinking that they have conquered. It is their intelligence, it is their energy. But remember, the whole theme of the Kena has been that there is a mind of our mind, life of our life. So even the knowledge, the intelligence or the powers working through the gods are not theirs. It is the eternal. So it is the eternal conquered for the gods, and in the victory of the eternal, the gods grew to greatness. And this is the truth, not only for the gods, it is the truth for us. And we would say, in a language much more familiar to us, in the victory of the divine Shakti in me, my work was achieved. By her action through me, my life has grown, and so on. But we are not conscious of it. The gods are not conscious that it is the eternal who has conquered. And so this was what they saw. Ours the victory, ours the greatness. But having come to this, it is time now for the next step in evolution, for these divine powers to awaken to their own greater potential, and for us as human beings also to become conscious of that which is the truth behind. And so verse 2, the eternal knew their thought and appeared before them, and they knew not what was this mighty daemon. And all this we have read last time in Sri Aurobindo's commentary, where he elaborates in great detail. But in the text which we read last time, Sri Aurobindo is pointing out in a long list what are the different operations of the gods in us which are thus challenged by the appearance of the unknown. He says, the brilliant harmony of the intellect, the aesthetic mind, the moral nature, the vital desires, the body and senses, which they have established with so much labor, this is now threatened by something which is so much greater, that everything developed so far is insufficient, and there is the fear of an unknown which cannot perhaps be known, and the infinite presses against the fragile walls which have been erected to define and shelter our limited being and pleasure. So at that point, these different aspects are important to dwell upon. Intellect, aesthetic mind, moral nature, vital desires, body and senses. In what way are they challenged? Briefly last time, we touched upon what it means to be in an evolutionary crisis. But I thought it worthwhile to elaborate on each of these a little bit, especially in the context of the present. All of human evolution has been brought forward. We will at first say by our efforts. We look deeper and say by the efforts of a collective. We look deeper and say by the effort of the gods, the cosmic powers working in and through us. We look deeper and say by the eternal, by the divine, or by the divine Shakti working through these different beings and communities and cultures, pushing forward human evolution. But what is it threatened today? First, he speaks of the brilliant harmony of the intellect, which in the presence of this unknown will be upheaved and shattered to pieces. I took this example last time already, and we can see how the modern age has come to its limit. All the attempts to harmonize have reached some kind of a limit, not everywhere, but in the peaks. And where they have reached the peak, they realize their insufficiency. And what is after is so different from the intellect that in its presence, the intellect even appears to be futile, not just insufficient, but even meaningless. I recall an incident narrated by somebody. One of his relatives was a scientist in Calcutta, I believe in one of the premier institutions of the country, and he was visiting the Himalayas and came upon a sadhu who was sitting with his little kamandalu and pretty much bare-bodied in meditation. And he was told this is a great sadhu, so he went to the man and said, "Why are you wasting your time following some fantasy in your meditation? Look at what modern science has achieved. Look at how much we have learnt and how much we are able to master of nature." And the sadhu lifted his kamandalu, that is the bowl of water, placed it in the air and left it hanging in mid-air and said, "Can your science explain this?" And the scientist was so shocked, having been brought up in a very materialist mind. This was a miracle which nothing in his existing science could explain. He went back to his residence, resigned from his job, and became a disciple of this yogi. When I heard the story, of course, my reaction was different. I said, "Oh, what a wasted opportunity." He should have continued his pursuit of science and sought to deepen the knowledge from the yogi rather than abandoning the pursuit of science. But this is in fact how the rational mind responds when faced with something so different. Either it loses hope in its own capacity because it realizes nothing it knows even approaches that and gives up, or it withdraws in fear from that greater possibility. And as I mentioned last time, even people, scientists, in the face of evidence of higher occult or spiritual powers, refuse to look at the evidence. But there's something else even more profound. Our rational mind, the power of intuition within ourselves, we don't need to turn to something else outside. When meeting the power of the intuition, our rational mind feels helpless and insufficient. The intuition goes straight to what it needs to show, and the rational mind looks and says, "Oh, how did you get to that?" At best, it can chase after and then try to pursue and develop the insight given by the intuition. But if the rational mind thinks of, how am I now to grow into an intuitive consciousness? It is so different. In fact, as the intuitive consciousness grows, you look at your own rational powers and say, "This is such a waste. I wasted years in pursuit of development of my intellectual power or intellectual knowledge." When this domain opens before you, everything is there. All knowledge is available. And I should have spent rather the time to develop this higher power instead of pursuit of the intellect. Of course, this is how it appears. In evolution, nature ensures we pass through the intellectual development before meeting its insufficiency and the greater powers of the intellect. When the mother narrates the stages of her own life in cycles of 12 years, she describes how, I think it was from 1908 to 1920, the 12 years were spent in intense intellectual development and training. And you wonder why. By then she had already realized her soul. She knew and lived in the divine presence within her. She had developed occult powers and capacities. Why did she need to go through this intense development of the intellect? And precisely because these are levels of consciousness intended to be developed in the full intention of the Brahman in evolution, so that they may serve the higher powers. And if right now we do not see a bridge, we will discover eventually that there is a bridge not only for ascension to the higher intuition, but from the intuition to act through the intellect to express that which the intuition sees. And the best example we have is in Sri Aurobindo's own writings, where seeing from a higher power of cognition, experiencing ranges of consciousness far beyond the intellect, he is able to articulate through the intellect with such perfect precision and mastery, not only of the language, not only of the power of the language, not only of the mantric impact, but a full, clear, rational structure, more precise and complete than the best of the lawyers, precisely to describe domains of experience and consciousness which are beyond the intellect. It is towards such a mastery that evolution intends our development, and therefore the passage through the intellect is necessary. But when the brilliant harmony of the intellect experiences this unknowable divine consciousness, there is a fear that it will shatter to pieces this brilliant harmony. And of course, rather than this fear of being shattered, one has to learn to submit to a greater power and put under its guidance this developed knowledge and power of the intellect. The same thing happens in conditions of deep meditation when we come on the brink of a breakthrough, when our little narrow consciousness touches something vast, immense, infinite. And on that brink, suddenly we experience a fear. What if I cannot return? What if I lose my mind? What if I die? What if I collapse? What if my breathing stops? These are all common fears which come, and instantly one pulls back in fear. Who is pulling back? And from fear of what? The narrow littleness meeting something infinite. It's not something larger, it is infinite. And so it has the fear of complete shattering, dissolution. The ego fears loss of itself. Sri Aurobindo emphasizes in one of his letters to a sadhak, when he asks, what happens? Will I lose myself? And Sri Aurobindo says, no. It is the limits of the consciousness which are lost. Consciousness is not lost. It is the limits of consciousness which are lost. And again, we have to learn to accept this passage and this conscious self-submission. The moral nature, the aesthetic mind similarly, which has developed such a refined sense of beauty, of art, when it meets something which is not bound to forms, again it fears and shrinks. And you'd be interested to know that when the mother encouraged the development of music, painting, dance, literature, other than the traditional systemic and systematic training which was taught, she encouraged the very people who were teaching to go beyond the limits of form. The dance teacher here, one of them senior most, was Anuben, who came as a child, one of the earliest children in the ashram. And mother told her that you must learn to express beyond the formal structure of dance. So somebody was presenting a dance, having seen it all. Mother said, now express to me perfect peace. And suddenly you stop. How do you do that? If you tell me express a flower, yes, I can do, I will make this gesture. Express to me happiness, I can show that. Express to me love, I can show that. Express to me anger, I can show. How do you express perfect peace? And the person is confused. And of course, that is exactly what mother wanted. You may have also heard from Narad when mother spoke to him in one of his early meetings with the mother. She said, "You must bring down a new music." And Narad, of course, thought in terms of words. And mother said, "No, you must go far above words and bring out from there." Now, how do you have music without words? And obviously, the trained mind pauses, falters. When mother began to work with Huta to develop the new forms of art, painting that she wanted to express, including symbolic paintings and her series of paintings on Savitri, mother picked her as somebody who was fresh, untrained in any form of art, and taught her from scratch from how to sharpen pencils, how to mix colors, to all the steps through sketching and painting and application of colors and so on. And she said, "I will paint through your hands." The idea was, in the very consciousness of the body, something new would be established, which had no connection at all with existing traditional techniques and schools. And mother explained to her, and this I have heard from her directly, mother explained to her, "I have tried with many other artists in the ashram before. But," and she made with a gesture to indicate that they were too rigid, too formed, too fixed in their school of art. And I have seen many of those artists who came from Shantiniketan, who were disciples of some of the great painters of modern India, who would proudly speak of what they learnt under them and what school they belonged to. But that itself was the limiting fixity. And mother wanted a free expression going beyond these rigid structures. Dance which can express spontaneously in the body's movement. Art which can express breaking the limitations of form and style and structure. And the same with music. And it's interesting to see today, increasingly in the world, the tendency to break beyond form and to express something which is as if a first touch of form emerging from a formless inspiration. That's the trend of the new music, new dance forms, and new arts. I would highly recommend for those who are interested to see the television series which come in various names, So You Think You Can Dance, from various countries, where they have dancers from various styles, and then they're taught to break out of those styles and move to something which is much larger. And you can see elements of what mother wanted beginning to awaken in the world. Because mother's work was not just here, it was for the whole world. And so you see, the aesthetic mind, however formed in its structure and forms, must outgrow that at some point. And one can conceive of the divine consciousness pouring, freely playing with forms of colors, music, even poetry, without being bound to any particular style. Again, there's a letter of mother's music, regarding mother's music. Somebody asks Sri Aurobindo, "Yesterday when mother played her organ music, it was such and such a raga, wasn't it?" And Sri Aurobindo replies that mother does not follow any fixed system of music or raga. She expresses what comes spontaneously from the higher inspiration. So again, for the aesthetic mind suddenly to say, "Oh, you break free of form," it is scary. But if you consider the very training which is given in classical systems, if you see it as a preparation for making your capacity more flexible, and rather than stopping with the training, you use it as a way of plastifying your consciousness to break free of its own limitations, then that same training can be a great aid. Then he refers to the moral nature, which is something quite special to human beings as distinct from animals. You can see intelligence in animals also. You can see even animals have a kind of an aesthetic sense, but the moral sense, the sense of something being good, evil, or wrong, is also a great, precious learning of civilization. A large part of civilizing is development of our moral and aesthetic nature. But when suddenly you're told, well, from the divine perspective, there is no such thing of complete good or complete bad. Even what appears as evil serves a purpose. And sometimes in the clash of forces in life, you're required to take positions which may be morally or ethically incorrect. It is scary for the morally formed person. Or the human mind says, that's very convenient, so now I abandon my morality, and they fall into wallow in some kind of an impulsive animal instinct, where all the refinement which morality and ethics had brought is abandoned. It does not know how to move beyond morality without losing the gains of the moral nature. And the same with the impulsiveness of the vital desires, to say that now you have to abandon all your desires and move to a higher principle where not your desire but a higher divine will be your source of impulse. It is a scary and disturbing experience. And then finally he comes to the body and the senses. You will see the intellect and aesthetic mind belong to one level. The moral nature is a bordering, and then the vital nature, and then the physical body and its senses. Now all three domains are going to be covered in what follows. That's why Sri Aurobindo mentions them. Agni representing the physical domain, Vayu representing the vital, and Indra representing the mental. But in the physical domain, the body and our senses, you will recall in our discussion last time how much struggle nature has had to go through. The gods have to work through to build the body and our powers of the senses. And now we are placed before a transition where we are told that this body has reached its limit pretty much, and the next step in evolution is a new divine body. And what does that mean? And what does it mean to outgrow the limitations of this? Our physical senses are only capable of so little to be able to see by diviner senses. Again, it can be overwhelming as an experience or scary as a thought. We know, for example, of people in whom there was a sudden, accidental awakening of the inner sight. The subtle sight opened and they began to see things of subtler domains, vital, mental, or even higher ranges. And the result was immediately a huge disturbance, an inability to function normally. They would meet with people and they would be overwhelmed with the realities on other levels which would hit them. And those were so complex, so rich, so complete, that the actual engagement with the narrow form of the personality and the discussions happening were not only meaningless, but almost contrary to the larger reality around. They could not distinguish between the two in many cases because the larger reality overwhelmed the lesser, superficial forms. And in most cases that we know of, they had to close down, reduce and close down these higher perceptions and bring them to a level which was either manageable or close them to a point where they could open them at will if at all they wanted, or shut them permanently so that they could focus on deeper or higher spiritual requirements of their evolution. And so even the senses are afraid of this overwhelming perception, as the physical body itself is being told this is not sufficient. It's interesting to see how in the present period all of these limits are being crossed, but in very small steps. In the development of the body and the attempt to outgrow its limitations, there are now manipulations of the genetics to try to introduce in the body, at first not so much the human, but other biological samples of plant or animal, to try to introduce modifications in them to enhance, meaning to overcome a lack, amplify a capacity. And once you're able to do that easily in them, you would want to do it in yourself eventually. How about taking a tablet which would release into the body a certain genetic imprint, and this can be done today with technology, that would modify the cellular working in all the cells of your body to eliminate an illness which is genetic, inherited, or to enhance your intelligence, or to make your body younger, or to boost the level of energy, or whatever it is. And these are actually being attempted with a preliminary success already. You will see in the common mind there is a reaction, almost of an abhorrence. Do not tamper with human genes. And so there are all kinds of laws being placed. The reaction of fear is what I'm pointing to, both on the positive side and on the negative side. And so this being the case, the gods knew not what was this daemon. And the verse 3 now is what Sri Aurobindo takes us to. Verse 3 goes, they said to Agni, O thou who knowest all things born, learn of this thing. What might be this mighty daemon? And he said, so be it. Every word is important in the Upanishad. And so Sri Aurobindo now takes us first to a large background. Why Agni first? What Agni represents? And the background knowledge of what these gods are like in the context of the Kena of the Upanishad. All of which is necessary for us to appreciate not only this verse and this conversation, but what is to follow. And recall, it is first Agni, then Vayu, then Indra. And we will also discuss why Agni first. If finally it was Indra who does it, why not send Indra right at the beginning? Why Agni, why Vayu, and why this sequence? All of these questions will be answered as we proceed. So Sri Aurobindo's commentary goes thus. Therefore, Agni first arises at their bidding, at the bidding of the gods, to discover its nature, limits, identity. The nature of the daemon which has appeared, the limits of this, and the identity of this. Now these three words are very interesting. When you first approach an unknown, you cannot know who is this. Let's say a stranger appears. Well, with human beings we already know it's a human. But let's say there was a storm, and as the storm has passed, on the beach we find a strange creature which has been washed ashore. Nowhere in our books, nowhere in human memory has such a creature been seen before, and such things do happen even now. And so people approach, what do you first assess? The nature of the thing. And the nature is a very generic description of what type, what category it belongs to. Is this a fish? Is this a mammal? Is this poisonous? Is it safe? Does it have sharp teeth? Is it alive? Is it dead? Basic things describe nature. Then the next focus is narrowing. Fish. What kind of food does it take? What temperature does it need? What pressure does it live under? If it has teeth, how sharp are the teeth? How big are the teeth? How big is its mouth? These are the things you assess. And the limits are formed within which you feel safe. Now I know this. Now I can put it in an aquarium. Now I know that I can feed it safely. Now I know I must remain 5 meters away because it has a sting of a tail which it can poke into me if I come too close. Whatever it is, the limits are defined. And the moment we have defined limits, we feel safe. This is interesting because we are defined by our own limits, and so we need to know the limits of others. Let's say in your class or a group or a team, a new member has come, a new human being. And to make the problem more complete, it is somebody who speaks a different language, comes from a different culture and a different climate. What's the first thing you do? You try to engage with the person, knowing it's a human, but you try to get its nature. Is this fellow the thinking type? Is he the emotive type? Is he the working type? You get an overall sense. And then what are its limits? So you discover the person is expressive emotionally. Well, how far does this go? How quickly does he lose temper? How quickly does he give up? What are its limits? And until you know the limits, you are very gingerly, as they say. You are very careful. You don't push, you don't do too much. You express a bit of a joke, you poke the person a little bit in jest, and you watch for their reaction. Oh, they took it well. Fine. Next time you can joke a little more. And over time, you describe or you become aware of the limits of the person. This person is a cool guy. You can say pretty much what you like and he won't get upset. Now you're relaxed. Or this person is easily getting upset. You stay away. Don't engage too much. Don't speak too much. Be careful. And now you know the limits. You can relax. You know how to deal with this strange creature. Only then comes the third level, the identity. Who are you really? And that's when you have to go much deeper. In most cases, we don't even bother to. But over time, that aspect comes forward. So Sri Aurobindo is describing these three stages. And you will find, although Agni approaches, why does Sri Aurobindo take trouble to describe these three stages? In fact, through Agni, Vayu and Indra, it is these three stages which are broadly covered. Agni approaching discovers its nature and it cannot know. Its nature is so different. And Vayu, when he approaches, tries to embrace it by defining its limits and it cannot embrace. Indra, approaching, tries to get to the heart of who this is or what this is, and eventually does make that approach. But Indra does not bother with the nature or the limits, nor Agni can ever get to the limits or the identity. Each has its own domain, and each builds for the next. So now we begin to understand why this sequence and why the previous was needed for the next. Unless Agni first approaches trying to get a sense of its nature, Vayu cannot now step in to find out its limits, and until then Indra cannot approach to know the identity. So there is a sequence in knowledge which is being developed. Now think of it as a human being. Within you are these three gods, cosmic powers working. As you approach to know somebody or that creature which came on the shore, first approach from you was Agni coming forward to know the nature, then Vayu defining the limits, and then Indra penetrating your mind and your deeper perception, knowing the person and the thing itself. And that's when the process of knowledge, of knowing someone, something, or a situation is completed. You see how profound just this one sentence is in the context of what Sri Aurobindo presents. Therefore, Agni first arises at their bidding to discover its nature, limits, identity. And then Sri Aurobindo takes an aside. Because we are wondering, first of all, why are all the gods suddenly so disturbed? Why is Agni being sent as their representative? Don't they know? Shouldn't they know they are gods after all? So Sri Aurobindo sets us a historical context to understand these gods. He says, the gods of the Upanishad differ in one all-important respect from the gods of the Rig Veda. There's one respect which is all-important. And once we get this, the other aspects of difference, you will be able to understand easily. And this is on a high priority. For For the latter, that is the gods of the Rig Veda, are not only powers of the One, but conscious of their source and true identity. They know the Brahman. They dwell in the Supreme Godhead. Their origin, home, and proper plane is the superconscient truth. So this is specific to the Rig Veda. The Upanishadic gods are different. They have got separated from this, and why we will see shortly. But in the Rig Veda, the description of the gods is different, and we must understand this because this is the highest station of the gods. Are powers of the One, from the One divine consciousness, a power put out, and each of these powers is one of the gods. Sri Aurobindo makes reference in another article to 33 of the major gods, 33 powers put out. Why 33? It's interesting. We'll take a look at that text next time and dwell upon that number also and its deeper meaning and symbol. And it's continuing in modern traditions of spirituality and occult knowledge. So, they are powers of the One, but as powers, when they are put out, they are not disconnected from the source. It's not like the will of the divine works through them, but they themselves have no connection to the source. Rather here, they are conscious of their source and true identity. They know that they are one with the divine, and the divine is their source. And Sri Aurobindo elaborates what this means. They know the Brahman, they dwell in the Supreme Godhead. Brahman, remember, means the one that is all. So they know the oneness, they know the all in which the oneness is spread and manifested. And where is their seat? In the Supreme Godhead, not in any intermediate position, but in the highest poise of the divine. Their origin, home, and proper plane is the superconscient truth. And what does that mean? The supramental consciousness and truth is that poise in which the oneness is known and lived, from which the multiplicity emerges and is known equally as a special expression of the oneness which is never lost. That poise of that one is their home and proper plane. Now, why does he use these three words? In fact, in the Veda, these three terms are often used. Both the sense of origin, the sense of home, and the plane of their action. And repeatedly, the Veda describes how the gods are ascending to their proper home or plane. Or they are living in they have reached there and are living in their proper home and domain. What does it mean? First, we recognize their origin. That any action of these deities originates here, in the oneness that knows the multiplicity. And so its action is always in harmony with the oneness. That is from where they come and to which they return, and so it becomes their home equally. When they are out from that poise, entering action in the universe, the focus is not on the oneness, but on the domain of the action. They are as if subordinate in their focus, subordinate to the oneness. And therefore, they can operate on lower planes where the oneness is not always known, and operate under the subordination of another power or principle which dominates there. And so they are not at home. When are they at home? When they return to the poise of oneness. And this means when they are not at home, they are outside their house, they are not in full power. This same idea you will see appearing in the vocabulary of astrology, where every planet has its favorite sign which is, so to say, its best friend or home. When they are in that sign, they are most intense, most powerful, Uccha we say, raised, exalted. Or there's another sign which is as if the very opposite condition, when they are fallen, they have lost their divinity, and they are now struggling in blind darkness to exercise themselves, but in a very chaotic and disorganized or limited and fragmented way. And depending on which house they are in, you will find their character of action is more in unity and harmony or in more chaos or limitation. And it's the same idea here, that when the gods enter lower levels, not their home, or subordinate to others, their power is less and less, subdued by the other power which is more dominant. But they long to return home. And so in that secondary plane, in that secondary function, they try to bring something of their poise of what they are at home. But the full transformation, full divinization takes place when each of these subordinated powers can now live as if in the consciousness of their home while still being in this subordinate domain. Think of it this way. In your mind, the power of your intellect, Indra, is not in his home. His home is there, in the oneness. But when he is operating here in this inferior domain, he brings as best as he can that power. But when he grows with the same splendor that he has at home, when he can express in the domain of the fragmented mind his knowledge in the consciousness of unity, then our power of intellect blooms, reveals the action of the supermind, and the mind itself is transformed. So the nature of this relationship is very important. As long as they are subordinated, they are working under limitations. But evolution is their unveiling on each of those levels. And that itself is the nature of the transformation. So the importance of home is described the way that they grow in their power and in their spiritual intensity closer to the grade of home. They are described as ascending to their home. Agni is in the physical consciousness working. And when he ascends, he is described how he becomes more conscious, more powerful at each step of his ascent. In the mind, he becomes the conscious will, the self-aware, the self-awareness of the will and intellect, and the freedom that it brings. But it is not yet in its own home, and it has to continue to ascend until it becomes the divine will directly revealed in us. And so their origin, and therefore also the relationship with the origin, is that of home to which you have to return. And as long as we're discussing this vocabulary, I may narrate an incident which was told to us by one of the sadhaks in the ashram, one of the old ones. He recalls being with and in a group of people seated, Mother asked all of them to say, "Define to me what is yoga." And many people gave many answers. And the thing that she picked, which she appreciated most, I think it was Pavitra who gave that response. It was the return journey home. In this context, it has a special meaning, as you can see. Our I is fragmented, separated from the source. We do not know our origin. We have lost our home. We are wandering. And as our consciousness awakens and we recover our consciousness of our home, it's not that we leave this world. We grow in consciousness to that which is the consciousness of our home. We grow in oneness with the self and the return journey home. And the third word he has used is the proper plane. Their origin, home, and a proper plane is the superconscious truth. What is the sense of the proper plane? When the gods are working, they are working everywhere because they are cosmic deities. But the proper plane of their work is the home, where they are most powerful and all powerful. That functioning is their proper functioning. On all other levels, because they are subordinated to other powers, their functioning is not their proper functioning, and because this is not their proper plane. So their origin, home, and proper plane is the superconscient truth. So you can see the three words have a continuity or development of thought in their sense. The origin is where it comes out from, the home is where it rests, and the proper plane is where it works. Now these three terms you will find described in the text which we will read next time, where he discusses how humanity, as it emerges, as it ascends in its evolution, rests in the domain of mind before moving on to complete its journey in the spirit. Equally, the gods descending from above take a station of rest in between at an intermediate level as they continue their action all the way down in the lower planes. And so this idea is important. The origin, home, and proper plane is the superconscious truth. It is true, they manifest themselves in man in the form of human faculties and assume the appearance of human limitations, manifest themselves in the lower cosmos and assume the mold of its cosmic operations. But this is only their lesser and lower movement. And beyond it, they are forever the one, the transcendent, the wonderful, the master of force and delight and knowledge and being. And all this we will see later, next time. But this is the gods of the Veda. And in the Upanishads, he says, but in the Upanishads, the Brahman idea has grown and cast down the gods from their high preeminence, so that they appear only in their lesser human and cosmic working. So this is why the gods in the Kena don't know the divine. Because in the Upanishads, the functioning of the gods is primarily in their lower working. And they have lost as if the sense of their origin, their home, and their proper plane. And so here they are surprised. And they have to make an effort to know that which is their origin. And the divine comes before them precisely to assist in this awakening. So we will pause here. You can meditate on this idea for a while.